God has to get these things out of us. Contention, strife, jealousy, busybodying, tale-bearing, gossip, and all these worldly things. And when He does, He's going to mature us and make us grow up. And that's what He's talking about. When you find the word sanctify, sanctify is the idea of growing up. It's separating us from the world. It's separating us from ourselves. You got two men in you, the outer man. The outer man, and you have the inner man. The inner man, isn't this amazing how we're running into this morning's message? It just, because we're talking about the spirits in prison maturing. Peter starts off this book talking about the maturing. When you see the word sanctification or sanctify, the common word sanctify is the word hagiazo, Hagiazo. It is a derivative of the word, it's just a derivative of the word holy. Sanctify means to set apart. Now that sure does sound like a real nice, dull word, doesn't it? Oh, I'm sanctified, I'm set apart for the work of God. Well, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? It has to have a meaning. How many people have you heard talking about, well, he's sanctified, or we believe in sanctification here? What do you mean? Set apart. That means to separate. Paul said, I was separated from my mother's womb to preach this gospel. Well, first of all, Paul had to grow up. He had to become a Pharisee. He had to be a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He was of the tribe of Benjamin, which was an honor because Benjamin was in southern Judah. Only Judah and Benjamin was in southern Judah. So he's in the southern kingdom. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He was circumcised the 8th day. He said, I've got all of these qualifications. I should have been a doctor of the law. And he said, I had to end up killing Christians. He was a murderer. He was a serial killer, killing Christians. Paul said, I made havoc of the church. It means to murder. And then he said, God had to strike me down. He had to strike me down, and then he had to start making me holy. And he put Paul through every kind of fire and trials as he was preaching to the Gentile churches, which was the spirits in prison. And he was preaching to them, and he had to go through a lifetime of trials. On his first missionary journey, Paul did something that he probably would not have done in his old age. He got so angry at John Mark for just quitting. Now, John Mark eventually wrote the book of Mark. In fact, it was the first of the Gospels that was written. John Mark wrote it. And he went with Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey in Acts the 13th chapter. And on that journey, John Mark went with Paul and Barnabas, and he got up here. They left up here. They left Jerusalem, went up here to Caesarea Philippi. I talked about this morning. Then they went down to Cyprus. Then they hit the coast of what we call Turkey or Pamphylia. And Paul hasn't even got into any trouble yet. He hasn't even gotten to Antioch where they're going to throw him out of Antioch. And John Mark is a kid. John Mark said, well, I've had enough. I'm going home. Bye. And he quit. Boy, Paul was boiling. You quit? I can say to him now that I'm an old guy. Paul, he was a kid. But I couldn't have said that when I was 25 or 30. I didn't know that. That's why he quit. He was a kid. And then Paul gets back to Jerusalem after this journey. These journeys would take several years because they would preach all over the place and come back. At least 6 or 8 months, could be a year or two. He spent a year and a half at Corinth on his second journey. He comes back, comes down here. They go to the council in Acts the 15th chapter. They meet with the council, the church council. And then Barnabas said, you ready to go on our next trip? And he says, well, let me go get John Mark. Paul said, he's not going with me. Paul was furious. And Paul and Barnabas had such a clash. They had a fight. And the contention was so sharp, these two godly men split. You think Paul would have done that after he got older? No. You know what Paul is showing us there? In that 15th chapter, at the end of the 15th chapter of Acts, he's showing us what a common sinner he was and how he needed to develop. And Paul wrote what's called some prison epistles. Philippians was one of his prison epistles. 1 Timothy was a prison epistle. That means after he makes his 3 missionary journeys and goes over here into Asia and goes over here to Greece and comes back to Jerusalem. He made 3 journeys, and then his last journey he went up to Rome to be executed. He had appealed to Caesar at Rome for his having been captured. Once you appealed to Caesar, you couldn't back out on the appeal. You had to appear. Well, he wrote several epistles when he got up here. Around 65 A.D. Now, when he went off on his first missionary journey, it was before 35 A.D. because John Mark wrote the Epistle of Mark around 35 A.D., just a few years after Jesus died. So Paul is immediately going out on this missionary journey, and John Mark is going with him. He's a kid. It's probably 35 or 40 years later where Paul is in prison. And one of the tenderest things in Scripture is what Paul says. Look over here at 2 Timothy. See, Paul had to mature too. It's not like he started off mature. He just got through killing Christians right and left. But look at 2 Timothy. This is one of his prison epistles, and one of the last things he wrote to Timothy as Timothy was pastoring at Ephesus. Paul is in prison at Rome when he writes this, and Timothy is over here in Ephesus, and he's a pastor of the church here. And he says to Timothy, in verse 9, it's very touching. Timothy, do thy diligence to come shortly unto me. For Demas hath forsaken me. Demas was one of his companions in the Word. Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world, and is departed unto Thessalonica. Crescens has left and gone to Galatia. Titus unto Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. He's all I've got left. Take Mark. This is the first mention that he has of John Mark when he says, he can't go with me no more. But he's an old man, he's about to die. Take Mark and bring him with thee, for he is profitable to me for the ministry now. He's ready now. You see, not only did John Mark mature, Paul matured. We're not supposed to be fighting the way Paul fought Barnabas, are we? No. Paul reveals his human side through the Scriptures. He says, bring John Mark, and Tychicus have I sent to Ephesus. The cloak that I left at Troas with Carpus. I got one coat. Now these charismatics say all these apostles were all rich. He said, I got one coat, and I left it at Troas. Troas is somewhere over here. There's a church at Troas. It's right over here close to Ephesus. He said, when you come, Timothy, bring my coat with you. I'm not rich. These charismatics are a bunch of fools. He said, I got one coat. Bring it with you. That I left at Troas with Carpus, one of my other workers in the ministry. When thou comest, bring with thee and the books, but especially the parchment. And one other thing, let me warn you about one of the young preachers there at Ephesus, Alexander, the coppersmith. And being a coppersmith, he worked in the temple of Diana